All right, let's start again then. Apologies for that. So like I was saying, this morning we were really focusing on everything that is related to the security of blockchain networks, how we can improve performances, how we can improve confidentiality, and basically how we can make sure that the security of the system is at a level that is appropriate enough. This was really the focus of this morning and also the beginning of the afternoon, and now the focus of this afternoon session is really the other aspect, the other way around, and we want to have a look at blockchain technology and see in what specific areas this technology will be used in order to increase the level of security of our solutions. We are going to take a few examples, but first what I would like to do is maybe to remind three core concepts that are around cybersecurity. Of course, there are many different ways to describe cybersecurity, and there are multiple definitions. However, we can start from those definitions, and there are really three properties that we would like to maintain when we are looking at cybersecurity. You have the first one, which is integrity, with integrity being defined as the maintenance, assurance, and of accuracy and consistency of data over its entire life cycle. So this is really making sure that the data remains as is. The second aspect is confidentiality, so making sure that the data is not being leaked unintentionally, and that people that don't have authorization access to the data, or that the data is stolen. So this is the second aspect. And finally, there is the authenticity aspect that is there, with the definition being around the genuineness of data, making sure that the data received at the collection server is original and was received exactly as it was sent. Making sure also that there is really a link between the data that was the origin and the receiver. So these are the three main aspects, and what we would like to start with at the beginning of this session is having a look at, okay, we have those definitions that are broad definitions of cybersecurity. We all know to some extent what blockchain is used for, and so we want to analyze both the use cases, so the specific areas where blockchain can be used in order to secure specific systems, and also the functionalities of the blockchain that are being used. I'm going to give a few examples, and then the goal is that everyone here helps us to complete this slide. So basically, if we look at integrity, one main category, one main usage that could be used of blockchain is notarization, something very simple. You take data, you notarize it, and then afterwards you are sure that the integrity of the data will remain as is, and so this is the first function, and that could be used, for example, in a use case that is document certification. And so this is the first example of trying to maintain integrity. Then we have other examples. I think that actually this one, confidentiality, will probably be the one where we have the most, where we will struggle the most finding specific use cases, because really the only one that is currently out there is the fact that you can create access right registries using a blockchain in order to give access to specific data to some people and deny access to other people. This is used, for example, in self-sovereign identity. This is a very strong component of self-sovereign identity. And the final example that I've given there regarding authenticity is basically everything that is related to digital scarcity. So if you want to have, for example, systems that are track and trace systems where you want to have a very fine view of a product and its digital twin along the way of the value chain, you will be able, using blockchain, to keep track of this data and making sure that all this data remains authentic. These are the few examples. Now the floor is yours. What is missing there? What use cases? What usages of blockchain? I have a few things to help you maybe, but first I would like to get a few first inputs.
Food safety. Absolutely missing is food safety. I think you should maybe put that under the authenticity label.
Okay, authenticity. And so what you're using here as
Track and trace.
track and trace
absolutely.
system.
Yeah.
Okay.
From producer until consumer.
Okay, food safety. Excellent.
Yeah, it's a fairly small comment, but it's not necessarily limited to food, right? I believe there's already an initiative to track diamonds.
Yeah.
So acid
the blood
tracking.
diamonds in the US there is okay, so yeah, of course anything that has to do with blood diamonds and so on, but indeed not only for food safety but also for drug administration, so medicines. In the US there is a use case with the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So that is absolutely lacking here, I think.
Okay, so if we think about it, so this is really about authenticity of data, making sure that data about a product or a good remains authentic alongside the chain, so that in the end you have accurate information about what has happened before, and that allows you to make sure that the food is safe, make sure that the diamond is not coming from a country that you don't want it to come from. And so this is really the track and trace use case. Okay, excellent. Other ones?
So I think that in confidentiality you have access right, like an access control element. So this could be also used in IoT. So there are some projects. And speaking of self-sovereign identity, I think it's also interesting to point out that here blockchain is not only used as access right, but also it's based on decentralized public infrastructure, which is built on blockchain. So it kind of overlaps with integrity. So you have access to public keys, and you can be sure that they haven't been tampered or falsified.
Is it really about the fact that the keys are tampered?
Anyway, I mean, it's alternative to any kind of centralized repository of keys or certificates or whatever.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand. So what you mean is that you want integrity about the identities that are being used, i.e. the keys that are being used to sign the credentials, to remain the same, and this information to remain still in order not to mix different entities being interacting with you, for example. And so that would be under integrity. Is that what you are meaning? I'm trying to
also, I mean, confidentiality is a bit too broad issue for, I mean, technically speaking, blockchain is terrible for confidentiality and privacy, right? Because everything is public. So what you can do is play with different layers to provide fine-grained tweaking of access control and things like that.
Yeah, sure, definitely. What we are meaning here by confidentiality is not really the confidentiality within blockchain systems, is the use of blockchains in order to improve confidentiality within specific systems. So yeah, I definitely,
Fair enough.
yeah, take your point, yeah.
Thank you. I think that confidentiality is one of the key points that enable today to think about consortium, and especially consortium of people that will not work together at that time because they are competitor on their place, and that thanks to that it enables to maybe mutualize some resources that would be benefit from competitors. For example, I'm thinking about the KYC processes. That is something that competitors' banks would like to mutualize, but there is confidentiality enabled by blockchain that make them possible together in a consortium and to work together while keeping some other information confidential because of commercial purposes or regulatory purposes. So I think that it's indeed confidentiality broad use case improvement because of that.
Okay, definitely. So I think it's a bit of a similar point here. Also, of course, confidentiality is a main aspect of blockchain because of some of its use cases require a lot of confidentiality for business reasons, for regulatory reasons, etc. And okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the CIA thingy, I think integrity is pretty much clear that blockchain can solve this. Authenticity as well, because you can have public-private key pairs. Confidentiality is something. So you were mentioning the consortium thing, but this is a private blockchain. So if you think about a public blockchain, which is the basic, the first one, Bitcoin, right? It solves the integrity thing, it solves the authenticity thing, but it doesn't solve confidentiality. So I think maybe, well, what if blockchain was never made to solve the confidentiality problem, but was more for integrity, authenticity, and accountability? So that's why maybe also you don't have use cases for the confidentiality, because this is something on top always. You can use encryption, then you have confidentiality. You can make a private blockchain, then you have confidentiality. But if you use just a pure blockchain technology, you will never have confidentiality, because that was not the purpose. The purpose was not to have confidentiality. It was to have integrity, accountability, and authenticity.
Okay, that is an excellent point. And yeah, definitely, that is an excellent point and an excellent explanation why there are so little use cases within the confidentiality aspect. So I think that this is one important aspect. Let's say that the main focus of blockchain is really not confidentiality, but the other ones. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So blockchain is not the answer for CIA.
Yeah. I think we can agree on that. Okay. So on the other aspects, which seems to be the most important ones, what are we missing? There can't be only 4 or 5 blockchain use cases, right?
I have a controversial one, which is voting systems. So it's kind of a combination between authenticity and integrity, but kind of a hard requirement in most of these systems is the confidentiality, which is now provided by many base blockchain systems. So it's an interesting use case. It's very difficult to implement, of course.
I think it's been implemented in Slovenia. Seriously, I talked to a guy who was part of the team building the solution, and they even had a special challenge because in the legislation of Slovenia you could not know how the results are changing during the voting period. So so they had a dilemma to make it as open as possible, but then it could not be public blockchain. Otherwise, the temporary results would be available during the election day. So they opted for a kind of private. Private blockchain solution based on Ethereum, but I'm pretty sure of those guys. I'm not sure whether election actually happened, because I was speaking to the guys while they were busy building the solution.
Yeah, so there are definitely a lot of people trying to solve this very complex problem of voting. So maybe if we come back on the elements you said, so authenticity is on voting system is about making sure that the people who vote has the right vote, correct?
Right, and that they... This might... Right, you should only be able to vote when you have the right to. You should also only be able to authenticate yourself once and not twice. Like, otherwise it would be pretty easy to swing the vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about the integrity part? You had a question.
Well, on the voting thing, you also want to be able to prove to stakeholders that the vote was fair, right? That the counts were fair without necessarily revealing who voted.
True.
Right, and you want to be able to do that to any interested party. I mean, we've had e-voting also in Switzerland on Ethereum, right? In Zug, they've done it on Ethereum and on Fabric as well. So there are a lot of people doing it. But so that's also part of it. It's proving the integrity of the whole process.
The other example interesting example that I heard of, and it might be interesting for the public sector. I heard it from Brazil. What the guys did there was to create a blockchain-based solution for taking the votes of people in order to make a pressure on the parliament to do that certain legal or certain laws around a certain topic. So there is a law there that says if you have, I don't know, 100,000 signatures on a certain any public related matter, you can get the chance that the actual topic would be voted for whatever reasons in the parliament, and that's what they did with a couple of topics already a few years back. So I don't know in which one we could put it, maybe in integrity, but for public sector, I think it's extremely democratic and an open way of managing a society, if you want.
Yeah, sure. So the use case is indeed quite similar to the voting one, where you want to make sure that the people who vote or who support a resolution have a genuine right to do so. So yeah, definitely that goes into the same direction. Okay, so if we summarize, we have different use cases and we have different applications of blockchain being used mainly to protect integrity and authenticity. It's less about confidentiality because blockchains were not built for that, really. This is what the output of the conversation has really been. And okay, that's really a first point. Maybe to make sure that we don't miss anything, so a few more use cases that are here. Maybe just to give ourselves more food for thoughts and elements that could be in the previous tab. So we were, of course, talking about provenance and tracking, so track and trace systems, which are very important. I think there is one aspect that is very important also related to crypto assets, which is the custody and escrow of assets. One main element of blockchain is to make sure that you can't move assets and you can't jeopardize with the integrity of those assets at some point, at any point when they are in the system. So this is maybe one important aspect that we only touched upon previously. And asset tokenization is actually something that is quite similar, making sure that the integrity of the data is not being attacked. Digital identity, we talked about it. Also real-time transactions, really nothing much related to cybersecurity here. That's not really the thing, but something that is interesting here is automated execution. If you use smart contracts in order to automate processes and business logics, you will be able to make sure that the integrity of the processes will be completely locked. So maybe this is one other aspect that we could look into in terms of what it is used for.
Another use case can be from INA tower, which is like you sell your immovable assets. Let's say you sell your farm or land or a apartment, yeah. So that can be tracked in a blockchain, so that you know that it is coming from the right hand, and there are no double booking or double selling of those assets. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So one of the main aspects of maintaining the integrity of the data is making sure that it is not duplicated.
It's not duplicated, and then the authenticity is, yes, it is from an authentic source. So integrity and authenticity both are important.
Okay, all right. Any other comment before we? Yeah, sure.
I see here you have like example medical records, and it's in the digital identity. I think that in this sector, in the health sector, blockchain can actually do its role not only in terms of authenticity, but in fact efficiency, first of all, because you have like the science is changing quite rapidly in that field as well, and until you get some laboratories to actually take in consideration the last few years scientific research, is already a lot of people will not benefit out of it. So, for example, if you would build a kind of public consortium between the family doctors, the labs, the hospitals, where you can easily adjust what are the recommended values or whatever. That's one thing. A second thing, you can apply AI to deal with big data in order to give some suggestions. All sorts of things combined together, for me, that's really one of the most noble use cases we can think about.
Yeah, sure, definitely. And so we had actually a workshop on healthcare in September, and one of the main aspects that came out of this workshop was the ability of using blockchain in order to monetize data. And this data monetization first enables you to have access to data that you were not able to access before, and second, and this is, for example, linked to prediction markets, it allows you to make sure that the data that you are getting in could be of better quality, because you are paying for this data and making sure that this data is properly collected. So that might be an aspect under authenticity. I don't know if you think that this is something relevant that should be mentioned in any case, but maybe something around monetization of data in order to ensure the authenticity of it.
I have a question in this case. The benefits of blockchain in such a situation, does it really outweigh like the downsides of reduce or like problematic privacy? Because I feel like that's a very difficult problem to solve, especially with health data. This was probably also discussed during this workshop.
Yeah.
So basically, maybe not use blockchain in this case, if you do want to use blockchain, then why do these benefits that we like, the integrity and the authenticity, outweigh like the benefit of not using blockchain in this case?
Yeah, definitely, that's a good point. And actually, it's always the same thing. Like blockchain is used as part of a broader solution. So of course you are going to make sure that data is properly anonymized in order to make sure that the data remains confidential, and then you are only using the blockchain in order to monetize this data. So monetize, for example, the collection of the data before it is anonymized and then put into the system. So it's not really going against each other.
Also had a small comment on that topic on questions. So one of the problems in medical records is that there are no scrutiny, there are no access logs very often. So it was the case in Netherlands where a patient's data was accessed, and it was kind of a famous person, you probably know. So that's pure in the focus of security. You at least can provide some logs and some more fine-grained access to patient data, at least to minimize abuse of private data in that sense. So, but again, not putting any private data on blockchain, obviously.
So I think in Estonia, right, they're doing that. The governance system where the idea is that you can go direct from the doctor to the pharmacy to the client, but the patient has full vision into who's accessed the data and why. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even apparently even if it's the police checking up on your driver's license or something, you can theoretically do that. a question for you on use cases, and there's a sign behind you, Ludovic, warning about the dangers of fake news. So my question is, to what extent does anyone have an idea how we might use blockchain to do basically track and trace and provenance stuff on pure information? As opposed to information about items, but on news and other kinds of information.
Maybe ask Facebook. I just heard Mark talking about it.
Maybe you should ask Mark Zuckerberg, because he was answering this question for the Facebook the other day in front of...
Next time I speak
So Adriano Max from IBM. So first of all, to answer that question, I remember seeing a project which is kind of addressing this kind of they're trying to provide a kind of a consensus for oracles. So anyone that can be a supplier of external information to the blockchain in the form of oracles. But okay, how, if I'm an oracle, how do we agree, and you are oracle, how do we agree that the information that we are sharing are correct and trustworthy? So there are projects that are already working in that direction, kind of using the consensus algorithms to get a kind of an alignment across the different oracles. Oracle consensus, and then you can extrapolate that same principle, for example, to fake news. For any kind of external information, could be the price of the stock, could be what is the weather forecast for tomorrow, could be fake news. So it's a quite interesting approach.
Just like to point out that what most people believe, even if they agree, is not necessarily the truth. So just that system is flawed.
Yeah, but hang on a second. So what I'm saying is not necessarily to use blockchain to give a score to information. What I'm saying is to use it to say, let me prove this is where it came from, right? This is where it's going, right? And then let you decide the value of that information.
But in that case, what you want is provenance of information, right? So now we need licenses to share information online. So that goes against freedom of speech, surely.
No, I never said that, not at all.
Well, if you can track where all the information goes from in the news, then you can always say, careful, because I'll be able to track down anything you say.
Let's talk about provenance. I just want to know, say, this is the information came from here under these this information came from here under these circumstances, right? And absolutely quite free. You're free to decide whether you like it or not, which is a whole different which is a whole different discussion. But at least you might be able to say, well, this came from X and this came from Y, and maybe I like X and you like Y. Okay, then we have another discussion. But at least I have more of an audit trail, let's say, of the information, and could that be useful?
Because also part of the fake news problem is that content is being reused out of context in order to prove something that is wrong. And so having this audit trail would mean that a picture that has been taken in 2009 couldn't be used in order to say, oh, look at the riots that are in Brussels at the moment, because the picture is not
I just
contributing to that.
fear if you remove the anonymity from the public discourse, it will not lead to good things. But yes, there's another premise. But yeah.
But that's why I wanted to bring it up. That's a good question, because I was listening to a podcast on the plane up here about this guy Morantz wrote a book, and he was talking about some of these trolls, like this one guy in California, right, during the last election, and the journalist was in his house, like watching, a journalist from the New Yorker, and the guy's like, oh, today I feel like making this lie, and he would like do it online and show it, and the next day it was on Rachel Maddow on Fox, and I'm not giving any judgment on that. It got into the real discourse, right? And these things happen.
I guess you will take it.
Well, it's far less exciting than this, but there's another use case that is becoming very popular, which is in the video game industry. So when you come up with an item in a game by making it a unique ID, so essentially a hash, you can now trade it, and it has value that has been added because a specific player found it and is trading it. So whereas before this item would have been, think of crypto kittens if you will, but just on video game level. I think it's just a notary type, subtype.
yeah, so here we are. This is again one excellent example of authenticity, making sure that digital scarcity, so an item that has been produced or taken or discovered first by someone, is recognized in the future as an item that is actually scarce. And so this is really going again under authenticity. I'm glad that we are finding more and more use cases. If there are any more, yeah, again.
Yeah, well, I'm a bit surprised I don't see that already in your chart. So you guys probably know the EU IPO, the Intellectual Property Office. Since 2017, they are working with blockchain as an idea to fight counterfeit. Yeah, and you look at the Italian luxury brands, they produce like 10,000 units of a suit. They don't want to find 12,000 back on the market. Yeah, it's all about protecting the European citizen. Yeah, that's one thing. Second thing is DG Taxud. They are working on tax evasion, cross-border transactions. I don't see that either in your chart, and it's the Commission too.
I'm not the Commission, but I do
No,
know.
I mean,
I do know both.
Yeah. So
mentions
why
that
isn't-
you're referring, and this chart is on purpose, not complete. Anyway, so the first example is really excellent. So anti-counterfeiting, again, this is really about authenticity and making sure that there is proof that the item is genuine all along the aspect. For the other one regarding tax evasion, how would you classify that aspect? What are the core properties of blockchain that are being used, and what are the core functionalities that are being leveraged in this use case? Because we know the use case, the idea is really to try to classify them and identify the big families and the big ideas that are being supported through the technology.
I would put it under authenticity. Because the transaction that I do is real, is authentic.
Okay,
Or
and
not.
so the problem of tax evasion relies
more
on the lack of
accountability.
authenticity.
It's more accountability, ability to trace back
Okay.
transactions.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that accountability is something that came back also, that you were mentioning. So there might be one core aspect, which is accountability, that is another category and that is missing here. Would you agree with that, or do you think that it's another word to say the same thing?
Yes, the question that I would have is, within cybersecurity, I'm working in cybersecurity unit. I mean, we see the big risk. I mean, you download an app, and the app is infected. Can this not be used somehow to ensure that these apps are original, or these pieces of software?
Yeah, that is an excellent point. But so if we go deeper in that use cases, how is it done now? So we have certificates, right? And what would blockchain bring additionally to the system that we currently have? Because you can already know that if something is going wrong with what you're with what you're downloading. So where would blockchain really come in here? Maybe you, as you raised the.
I'm asking the question.
Okay, that's the good position to be in.
All these experts.
Thanks. So I guess this is a good question, but you can manage certificate authorities on a blockchain and have some way of having reputation for these entities and establishing which entities can be a certificate authority. And well, this applies to like, and these authorities can then sign these apps that you have and stake their reputation on whether there is or isn't a problem with them. This also would work for like the system we have for HTTPS, which also has a certificate-based system, which currently like the major browsers allow for some pretty interesting certificate authorities in their trust chain. So maybe we can use blockchain here to maybe improve that process a bit.
So if we try to go a bit deeper, so what is the problem here with the centralization of this certificate repository? And
so specifically with HTTPS, I believe Chrome and Firefox allow for like 20 top level certificate authorities who then sign sub authority keys for other authorities who then can make these HTTPS certificates. And there's not much control about who gets to get a certificate authority key. And well, for apps, it's currently, I believe, like the Google signs the apps that go through their security check. But you can have an additional system where the community behind Ethereum elects a few corporations or public institutions as authorities on the security of applications or websites. It doesn't really matter. And we know then that whenever such an entity signs an application or signs the certificate for a website, that the trust we can place in the security of the system is based on this authority.
This I know. I mean, this is part of the answer, but this is not the question. Okay. In fact, the problem is that even if you walk on your PC, you click on a link, you have a phishing email, you click somewhere, and you have a virus. Now, can this be avoided somehow?
That's a very difficult question. I don't think we'll ever. I'm not sure if we'll ever be able to rule out all phishing attacks. If there's a good solution at all, like even outside of blockchain.
There's another question where there's maybe another question where the blockchain could play a role. I mean, just to give you an example, we are not trying to promote driverless cars and autonomous cars which can talk to each other so that they can avoid incidents, because each car knows who's surrounding them. However, the system which was specified today is based on authorities and virtual number plates, but linked to real cars. Because if you don't link the identification of a car to a real car, you run the risk that the cyber attack would just saturate the crossing with phantom cars. Now, the problem with this solution is that the Article 29 Working Party on data protection says this is private data, so you cannot use the system. So imagine that you cannot use these tokens, which are identifiers. How can the blockchain help somehow? So that means you need to be sure that the message you get from someone who's driving near you, that it is a real car. However, you cannot know who it is, because if you know who it is, it's a privacy violation.
So this would be a problem where you need to add confidentiality to the data, right?
I don't see how that could be solved via blockchain. Like, you just basically the problem that you're describing is something where you need to know that the interactions that you're going to have with other vehicles are genuine interactions. And the only way that you will be able to do that is to have a repository that holds all potential genuine relationships that you can have with vehicles. And no matter if there is a blockchain or not, like this could very well be a centralized repository.
Yeah, so
because this repository needs to be created in any case.
The question is very real, the question is very real, but the solution which was today on the table, which has been discussed for years, was that each car will have a pile of number plates in the back of his car, electronic number plates, and you just take out the one you want when you start a communication or when you send a message with your location and speed. Now the issue is that this pile of number plates are still all identifiers of you. And this is where the Article 29 working party says, no, this is too far.
Okay.
A lot of these problems, similar to this one, are actually based on trying to prove that some information is correct. And yeah, but just because data is written on a blockchain doesn't mean it's true. So that's the Oracle problem all again. And so some of these are maybe not solvable in that way.
I mean, the first slide, which was sent in the last presentation, was the zero knowledge proof. Now this is the solution. Zero knowledge proof. I know it's a car and I don't know anything else. Sure. So you should work this.
So the design that you can imagine, so okay, the information of the actual serial plate is something that is personal information. You could design a system that basically enables you to share the fact that, to prove the fact that your serial plate is genuine and has been signed by an authorized party, and share only that information with the parties that you're interacting with.
So this is the solution. I mean, the way you present it now, just write it down because everyone is waiting for that.
Yeah, but you need to wait 5 years. 2 to 5 years.
But it's a zero knowledge proof solution.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily require that zero knowledge proof to be on a blockchain.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Easier.
I mean, a lot of this is solvable by cryptography in general because it's CIA, which is basically the three goals of modern cryptography. And it makes sense to use a blockchain whenever you have to sort of decentralize this, to eliminate a central entity, like the DNS naming service. That's a good example. You don't want to rely on that single server, right? So you can have a naming registry on the blockchain, like the Ethereum naming service for digital assets or anything really. And that's a really good example of decentralized security infrastructure.
Okay, so I feel you. This is an actual problem. This is a potential solution. You wanted to?
No, I just wanted to pick up on that because isn't, I mean, it's stating the obvious in this group, but the security aspects that blockchain brings only happen if it's some part of decentralizing something, right? So if you try to get rid of the security problems in a centralized actor, so when you start talking about self-sovereign identities or self-sovereign data, I think that's when it starts to get interesting, where you don't have, the authenticity comes not from a certificate authority, but from some entity or individual collecting attestations, which can then be proved, and then sort of the agglomeration of enough attestations gives the counterparty some sort of security. That to me is blockchain-y.
Okay, excellent. So I think that we have covered at least a good amount of different use cases. Some of them are purely blockchain use cases, some of them are not, and so we will make sure that only the blockchain use cases are really in the report in the end, because this is the blockchain observatory in the end. Okay, so let's continue the discussion. So one aspect that I wanted to check with you, so we talked a bit about identity, we actually talked a lot about identity. When we are actually talking about serial plates, we are actually talking about identity of a car, and the interaction can be seen as such. And so what you actually have in here, and what I would like to challenge with you, is the real benefits that are bringing blockchain in the specific aspect of decentralized identity. So basically you have two main steps that are being described here, with a user that will be doing simple interactions with a service provider. We really don't care about who this service provider is. That could be I don't know, that could be a website that you want to connect to, that could be a public service that you are connecting to and that you want to, where you want to authenticate yourself and exchange information between the two. And so the flow is quite simple. You are going to have, so the user, what we call the user agent, which actually would be an application that will be running on behalf of the user and doing the interactions with the different systems. And this user agent will first receive a request for authentication and some credentials, so data that is basically being requested by the service provider. After this request is being sent by the service provider, you will have the user agent that will send a single sign-on system via what we call the decentralized identity, so basically the keys of the user that are held into the user agent. This single sign-on system will be done and interacted with the service provider. And where this gets interesting is, for now, there is absolutely no blockchain. Where the blockchain comes in is when the actual data needs to be shared by the user right here, where credentials, the user accepts that some credentials are being used and shared with the service provider. And once this is done, there is actually an update of a registry inside the blockchain that says, okay, this service provider now has access to my data and I have given him this access for this specific period. If we follow the system, after the access registry has been updated, the actual data is being sent to the service provider, and the service provider will also be able to verify on the blockchain that the keys that have been used by the issuer of the credential are something that is legit. For example, if you are interacting with a website that wants to verify your identity, the website that is verifying your identity will be verifying that this identity has been provided to you by an authorized third party. So this is basically the system, and once this is done, access is granted. And so what I want to challenge with you is the securization of this aspect and the real usefulness of having a registry that is on the blockchain in order to first verify that the documents themselves are legit, and second, verify that the authorizations to access the data are properly registered on the blockchain, and why this is needed to be there. And then we will be talking about the revocation aspect, which is basically saying that we update this revocation registry. And I'm going to maybe ask again the question in a simpler way, because I've talked a lot. So you see the system, it's a very simple system. Keeping in mind the cybersecurity aspect that we are talking about, is this system any better than current systems? Or is it just a different way to approach it, just in a decentralized aspect? You were mentioning phishing before. So phishing is really about authenticating actors that you are interacting with. Is this system going to be better at tackling phishing issues, or is it going to be just the same? For example.
You've left us speechless.
I have a counter question. So, do you mean, like, do we avoid phishing by avoiding impersonation? Because phishing also happens by, like, I can sneakily try to get you to, like, a fake Google webpage and try to have you log in, which would also be phishing.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So the example that we are thinking about could be the very simple example of phishing. So if you create a system where you can verify all the time the identity of the actors that you are interacting with, so for example, I send you an email, but the actual digital identity that is being used to send you this email is being verified all the time, so an email address is in a way a digital identity. So if you manage those identities in a way that allows you to actually store multiple identities and link them to the same identities. For example, you would have your email address, you would have your Ethereum address, you would have different things, and you put that on a registry that is on the blockchain, and you say, okay, if I contact you with any of these, you know that it's me. Would that be something that is useful, or would that be complete overkill?
So I believe such a system already exists outside of blockchain, and it's like GPG.
Can you please explain what GPG is?
Or PGP. It's very similar to this situation. You have a public-private key, and whenever you send somebody a message, you sign the message, and then people can validate that it's you, and you can establish like a chain of trust actually, by sharing keys with each other and validating them. And in this system, it's basically, if I know that your key is definitely yours and you validated somebody else, then I can, based on that trust that the other person is identified. That could also, so this system of acknowledging and storing these trust signatures could be placed on a blockchain. But so this PGP system is actually pretty nice and has been here for a while. And I believe the main factor that has stopped public adoption is that it's really difficult to use. Even within the security community, there's not many people that have or use PGP keys.
Okay, so you are telling me that here the blockchain doesn't.
Well, it's
really. Which is fine. I mean, we are here to identify the real use cases.
So if you fix the usability aspect, then having this chain of trust stored on the blockchain is a definite option. But the weakest point for adoption is, especially in like authenticating the sources of messages, is probably usability.
Just to give you an idea about the problem, I mean, I just tell from real life stories, phishing mail. I mean, there's a research team in Cambridge working on fake plane tickets. I will give you an example how it works because my daughter-in-law had a problem last holidays. She makes a reservation online for a flight ticket, and 10 minutes later she gets an email saying that something went wrong in the reservation. Please can you key in your credit card details and everything again. I told her don't do that. I mean, she has been spending 2 months trying to cancel the ticket, which was bought somewhere in Hong Kong with her credit card. I mean, in Cambridge there's a research team trying to do something about it. I mean, if you have an answer, I mean, everyone is waiting for that.
I'm not saying that we have an answer.
Yeah, I mean that sort of phishing is slightly more difficult to solve, but there's obviously the plane ticket authenticity which relates to what we had before of authenticity. But I just want to get back to what he mentioned with the PGP. So that type of knowing who you're talking to, that's basically guaranteed by public key cryptography. The problem is we don't use that, right? So most emails are not signed because it's difficult. But when I first heard about cryptography and got interested in it in the 1990s, there were these key signing parties, right? Where you had you went to a bar and you met people that signed your key so that your key could be trusted, right? So there was this web of trust where people knew each other and then sort of verified their identity. So that is something that could be replicated on the blockchain in a way through a reputation repository or something like this.
Okay.
Well, so it's not really a blockchain, of course, but the system how PGP currently works is kind of similar to a blockchain where you announce like the signature. I know, like, say that I know you and announce this, then I announce this to a key server, and these servers share these signatures. And there might be adversarial incentives, but this kind of already is very similar to how such a system could work on a blockchain. So I guess a blockchain could be an improved backend there, but still the usability of the system is problematic.
Okay, excellent. So there are two additional things that we would like to cover before the end of this session. The first aspect is one aspect that was actually mentioned before in the discussion, which was using blockchain in order to enhance the level of service availability of some services and the resilience against attacks of those services. This is something that everyone knows. This is some of the one of the earliest cases of blockchain. What I want to do with you here is to say, okay, this is good in order to prevent you from DDoS attacks. This is good in order to make sure that at every single time you are making sure that you can't be censored. Okay, fine. But where are those properties actually being used in real life? This is the question. Simple question for one time. At least the setup didn't take 5 minutes just to explain the slide. Where do you want in real life, in business applications, high availability and making sure that you are not getting DDoS and using blockchain? And also making sure that there is no censorship.
I guess any application doesn't want to be DDoSed, so I cannot think of a company that would like their service to be not available. So any service would fit there, right?
Okay, right. But when does the risk of being DDoSed are so high that you need to use a blockchain in order to prevent that problem from happening? Are there cases? Or is this just a nice feature but
I think the best example is the most used example is the one that I mentioned before, naming services, like DNS and ENS, these things, because they are small enough to be actually implemented in a blockchain. I think you wouldn't want to replicate very expensive services on a blockchain.
And here what you are trying to make sure is that availability is very high because you want the service to be up all the time. Is that what you are saying?
Yes. I mean, a fully replicated naming service on a blockchain is more resilient, and it also eliminates a trusted third party.
Yeah, I don't know if blockchain really is a solution here because there's a moment where basically you will have something that it needs to interact with the blockchain. So this is the weakest link, I would say. So you would basically, I don't know, maybe an API or whatever, I don't know. So the blockchain itself, so you see, like, me as an attacker, I will not attack the blockchain or whatever, but the weakest link, the weakest thing, like, I know a server or whatever that is interacting that I need to go through with before going to the blockchain. I don't know if you can always just directly interact with the blockchain for a normal user. You see my point? So maybe like, I think it's difficult to say that blockchain will automatically help you prevent DDoS.
I think that's a nice point. If you still host the application layer of your dApp on traditional hardware, then if you remove the traditional hardware from the equation, your application won't work. So you'd need to look like to IPFS or Swarm.
Okay, excellent. So, if I understand you correctly, this is not really useful, right? like this is not a core property that you are really relying on heavily. It's nice to have the fact that it's resilient. And based on the examples that you are giving me, like DNS one is a good one. But
no, I think it's still very useful. It's just, I agree that it's difficult to implement for a number of reasons because people won't run their own blockchain node. But I think it's still better than having a centralized naming service, I suppose. And I can see where you're coming from with most blockchain applications would probably go down if Infura went down, which is one of the gateways. So yeah, that's a good point. But I think it's still useful.
okay, excellent. So I propose that we spend time on the last slide, which is actually the most important. So as you know, we are here for a working session, and we are working for a report. That is a very important one. And so we have a few questions. So we were naming a few risks. Phishing was one of them. So if we had to highlight some priorities and some key aspects out of everything that we mentioned before, first of all, what are the main cyber risks today that companies want to circumvent? So this is the first aspect. Is it phishing? Is it something else? What is the most important? What are the 2-3 elements that are the most important? I'm going to stop here and we can answer the other questions afterwards.
I would put on the first cryptography definitely, because not just what are the priority topics which should be further researched. I would say cryptography because it's the foundation of any blockchain solutions. It was mentioned today that some projects they are not using it properly. Even worse, some projects are making their own cryptography and not really verified by anybody else. So that's a high. You cannot highlight that enough.
So my question was actually on the first one. However, I really appreciate you taking the time to answer at least one of my questions.
Put it first.
We can do that too. No,
Actually, it's a follow-up on the second thing. So
okay,
we'll just wait until
let's
the
work
first
on
one.
the second one. That's fine.
You can
Just
do
go
it.
ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So the thing of the cryptography, I mean, like no one ever said that actually, SHA-2 got broken and that Bitcoin now it's unsafe. So I think cryptography, nowadays you have the means to use correctly cryptography if you take the right people, the people who know how to use cryptography, right? The problem is not everybody knows how to use cryptography properly, but there are the tools to really make it work. Now, for example, smart contract security is a different thing. So I think. So Ethereum is currently the most popular platform, I would say, for smart contracts. I'm not sure they're doing the job right. They were the first ones to do it, so they had other priorities, let's say, like this. They wanted to make it work, and it is working. But in terms of security, it's a different thing, in my opinion. So I think like we should maybe finally start thinking about how to create a blockchain that allows you to, from the beginning, have smart contracts that are secure, without any problem, because no one is going to now start creating. Okay, then you have the consensus layer. I agree. But there's so much research going on there, and right now, what is the research on smart contract security is just like, oh, let's detect some bugs there, and so on. But let's prevent the bugs directly from the beginning. Okay, instead of just. I mean, nothing against Mifril, really. You guys are doing a great job, and I think you can make a lot of money with that. But the thing is, like, how about we just forget about this and directly from scratch build a system that actually, where you maybe don't even need Mifril in the future? I don't know.
Okay. So is this a system where you have like these Turing complete or smart contracts that can do anything? Because I would argue that these systems, because they can do anything, can always include bugs and vulnerabilities. So if you want this property, then naturally you also have bugs. Then I guess you get to a point where you start to require some sort of formal verification. But then I have another question, like what guarantees that the properties that are verified over smart contracts actually are the properties that you want to verify? What implies that these properties make sure that there's no vulnerabilities? And I think this problem in general might not be solvable.
That's a very good point, actually. So having this Turing completeness, actually, this is actually the thing that actually opens up this whole box of problems. I would say just let's try to create something that is less restrictive than big current script, right? But not as powerful as the whole Turing completeness of the EVM, such that it makes then afterwards easier for tools like Mithril to do analysis, security analysis, because it's restricted. Okay, there's not so much that can go wrong. For example, like reentrancy problem. This is not actually something new. Some people think this is new. This existed before. It's not something that just appeared right now. And the thing is like so think about, so now there are already like 4 or 5 years where smart contracts are there. Think about what are the use cases, what are people really using it for, what are they doing with it, and then extract the essence and create a new thing from scratch, where you basically say like, okay, people are only using it for, like, they're only using these parts, let's create something from scratch that is not Turing complete, but like allows you to do whatever can be done already.
Wait, so you mean like just certain logical building blocks that are more than just a couple we have now, but not the whole thing? Yeah. And since you know what the building blocks are, then you can check them. All right, I buy it.
Great, thanks.
Okay, but what about this fancy new idea I have that I want to implement in a smart contract that's not supported by the basic building blocks you have now? What do I do? Do I go to a different platform? Because people will want this freedom. They will want to build new smart contracts and programs that run using smart contracts.
It gets you into sort of more use case specific protocols. You know.
So you build a new system.
For example, just an example. You can write a smart contract that simulates a SHA-2 hash function, but why would you do that? Seriously, like I saw smart contracts basically doing unnecessary stuff just because they wanted to, hey, can I do this on a smart contract? Yes, you can, but why would you? You would do it off-chain and then put it on-chain as a result. So for example, one of the main things of this tracing, right? Tracing things, transaction goods, whatever. So the ultimate goal is to store data on the blockchain, okay? So this is one of these basic blocks, one of these logical things that you need to have in a language. But you don't need to have an XOR whatever thing, or you don't need to have all of these instructions. You don't need to have all of this possibility, I think. I think really for the use cases that matter, you don't need to have this expressiveness. That's my opinion. I think, seriously, I think if you come up with a use case where you need something new, something really new, then you have big use case there. Because I think like everything that was solved so far using, I mean like confidentiality is still an open thing in my opinion. Like doing it efficiently is an open problem. Zero knowledge proofs, for example, I mean, it's an open problem still.
So I would say this is partly subjective. Like, do you want to limit people on what they implement on the blockchain or on Ethereum? And there's a second thing is, so when you start to want to use new like cryptographic systems that are not supported yet. So if you have a new zero knowledge proof system, for example, I believe that Ether, a zero knowledge token, I'm not super familiar with the theory behind it, but they use bulletproofs, and to support that, I understand that they need to use these more complex opcodes to implement the systems that they want to do. So in a system where you limit the programming to these basic blocks, you would not have the versatility that we have now to do these things.
Yeah, I'm sorry, okay, so last thing on this. Yeah, well, I think it's the problem is that they want to be compliant, so this legacy thing. So yes, they want to reuse existing opcodes, but they see that this is not enough, so they want to introduce more opcodes. How about we forget about opcodes at all and just say like, we need to have privacy, we need to have a way to have confidentiality. And this is something, it's a thing that is implemented, part of the Ethereum, for example, blockchain. And we say like, okay, if today we don't like snarks, we go to starks, and tomorrow we go to bulletproofs, whatever. What I want to say is that you should think, in my opinion, more on this way and not really on, oh, let's have this low-level thingies where you have like a push and an XOR and whatever, and then, oh, now we need some, I don't know, what is it? What did they want to introduce for the zero-knowledge proofs in the EVM? I don't know, but like, yeah, so that it was this particular opcode where I'm like, okay, like, so just like think about it, just say like, see the whole picture. It's, you want to have confidentiality, that's it.
I'm still at question one. So
I'm sorry.
Yes. I mean, I've given an example in the driverless cars of automated cars, or connected cars, as they call them. Now, another problem which we see is like in aviation. Everyone remembers probably the issue with the 737 MAX 8, which probably is somewhere a software error. Somewhere, which is the result of many subcontractors writing components. So I think the question which will become more of an issue is liability. I mean, and also maybe somehow quality control. Should we not have a means to know exactly what modifications are the source of the problems? Sometimes it's liability which plays a role, sometimes it's lives which are at stake, and sometimes it's just policy, like Huawei is on a blacklist in the US. Over here we have the 5G communication because we are allies of the US. We have to make sure, we have to prove that our components are cyber secure. I mean, I think there will be supply chain traceability will be an important question.
Okay, so you mean having an exact view of what came into the process of creating a solution, creating a product, creating a plane, creating whatever, and having a true track and trace system. Okay, so, okay, why not? I think that Boeing knows who did the software that is faulty and why it is faulty and why they had to create this software.
If the component producer would know in advance that it is reliable, maybe we would have more priority on customers.
Yeah, sure, but Boeing is liable today also. In the end. It doesn't matter to know if it's John Smith who did the software.
Yes, but the Huawei case is different. The Huawei case is different. I mean, you have a telecom installation today spanning half of a country, and there are thousands of suppliers in the chain. And something happens, IPR theft, whatever, being it media files, being it IPR from a new airplane, whatever. There comes a court case, no one knows anything. I mean, and then the whole system is suspicious. So, how to avoid this thing?
Okay, sure. So, can we take that as an answer to the third question? So, building traceability systems, no matter the case, like whether it be software, whether it be food, whether it be anywhere, that is the more important. Okay. So yeah. Let's try to finish to answer the questions. So the third question was, what use case should be prioritized? We are talking about track and trace. Do you agree with that statement? What are the most important use cases that should be looked into at the moment?
So, sorry, could we go back to the first question? I just thought of a possible answer. So the risk, I believe that companies can circumvent by using blockchain is collusion or adversarial actions taken by a partner in a contract, like by making like deals or other contracts, parts of the blockchain, you can avoid certain of these scenarios from happening.
Thank you for answering my first question.
No problem.
Okay, fine. So I will ask you a very last question, and I promise this will be the last. Again, I'm repeating myself. This is for a report. In this report, we have recommendations. What is your wildest recommendation that you think should be in the report? Or if not the wildest, the one that you think is most relevant?
I just want to add that for all the reports we've done, the recommendations has been the hardest. So you guys have a chance to be the group with the best recommendations. Okay? Just as a motivational.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Probably not the wildest, but kind of a topic which requires addressing. Recommendations to incentivize responsible vulnerability disclosures in the blockchain space specific, because in blockchain space, incentives to share vulnerabilities are a bit different than general space. I mean, it's never easy. It's difficult everywhere, but in blockchain development, it's specifically because economic incentives are so entrenched. People are sometimes just not incentivized to do that, or people who develop those projects, they are incentivized not to basically to acknowledge that they have it, and yeah.
Thank you. I said I wouldn't ask more questions, but I didn't say that I wouldn't wait until you talk. So. For real? Recommendations from this group?
So, yeah, my recommendation is super biased. Because of my presentation, and also, of course, like the system we are developing, and this is that developers and actors in the blockchain space leverage these tools that are out there that can help you either formally verify or inform security decisions based on like mathematical facts that we can discover from these contracts and from these protocols.
No, I mean you're right. I mean, like I think this is quite an important issue. Like, because blockchain, you have real assets. You may have assets that are linked to real, I don't know, to fiat currencies, whatever. So, I think security audits, smart contracts, or whatever, new blockchain platforms is important. And I think before you just release a technology on the market, it doesn't matter if it's a smart contract or blockchain technology, there should be some auditing. There should be some people reviewing it. It should be just more regulated. Otherwise, like, people will start using it, and then when it goes wrong, they'll complain, and then yeah.
So should that be a regulatory requirement? Should there be a legal certificate for blockchain?
That's the thing. If you make it this way, people, there are always people.
Yes, add another barrier. That'll help.
Yeah. That's the thing. It adds another barrier, right? But at the same time, it depends. It depends who regulates it and how restrictive it is.
I would just argue that it's better if you educate that if you have a vulnerability or you rush to the market and you have a mistake in your code, it will cost you more not even in the long run, in the midterm, than just having an audit, even if it's done by one of these automated tools. And if you print this in everyone's mind, they will always do it, rather than another regulatory
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, like, education might be the right answer, in the sense that you make it clear to people, really clear how big the consequences can be, so that actually the very first thought when they finish writing a smart contract is like, oh, I need an audit, or I need to check for the security at least before I actually deploy it, because they need to be aware of this, that the code is immutable. It's not just like a normal program. It feels like a normal program when you're programming it, but afterwards it's not. No.
Yeah, I just want to get back to this regulation point, and standardization is one thing, regulation is another. Sort of having a set of quality labels that someone can voluntarily obtain or not might be a good recommendation. It doesn't have to be over-regulated, but you know, I can trust the system if I know it's been certified to be level 1, God knows what, certification approved.
I'm glad to see we have recommendations.
Just a thought. Perhaps it's not a workshop, but should we look on the long term? What would be the impact of quantum computing on security and blockchain?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So this was actually one of the aspects that was supposed to be covered today. However, as this is a discussion that is, it's really a question about cryptography, and when you talk about with experts about that, usually they just throw away the discussion saying, oh yeah, we already have algorithms that are quantum secure, quantum resistant, so that's fine. And so I think that there definitely is an effort to regroup that information and share it in a very clear way in order to say what are the actual risks and the myth around quantum computing and the impact on blockchain technology. Because there is a lot of speculation on how this is the end of blockchains and stuff like that, where this is actually far from the truth. So I completely agree with you, and this is a good point that we as the observatory need to work on in terms of education and creating content.
I'm writing it down.
Thanks, Tom.
So education and recommendations rather than regulatory.
So education and recommendations rather than strict regulatory.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess a lot of people agree with you on this room, in this room. Okay. Excellent. So I would like to thank every one of you for joining us today for this day and staying so long with us. You are the true warriors who stayed all day long, so thank you very much for joining us. And we hope to see some of you in Malaga.